Hi, this is Andy XL back with another NFXL podcast. And in this one, I'm going to look at week 12 of the fantasy NFL world and who to pick or not to pick, as the case might be. So let's start with quarterbacks and get straight into it with the five, I think, are good starts this week. The first one is Jared Goff of Detroit. Goff gets the matchup against the Giants' injury hit secondary, and it is wide receivers that have exploited this area most. So the fact that Detroit are without tight end Sam Laporta should not hinder Goff's fantasy values too much this week, and I see him as one of the better starting quarterbacks in fantasy this week. Another one I would recommend to start is Patrick Mahomes of Kansas City. Mahomes comes up against the Colts this week, but the one thing the Colts have not done well, sorry, I should say, is defend the pass. Don't see Chiefs against the Colts and think, should I start Mahomes? They haven't been great against the pass. They are 11th best team for wide receivers to face and 7th best team for tight ends to face. So that should mean Mahomes is a good fantasy option this week, especially as the Colts are pretty good against running backs. So it might be the passing game that the Chiefs look to excel in this game. So Mahomes is another good start. Sticking with the eminently predictable, Drake May of New England is another one I would start. Anybody that comes up against this Bengals defense has to be a really good fantasy option, as they give up plenty of yardage and touchdowns to the opposition's passing attack every week without fail. So this is a great opportunity for May to show Cam Newton and the rest of us what he can do against such opposition. Right, another one. Jacoby Brissett of Arizona. In his 5 starts, Brissett is averaged 285 passing yards a game and has passed for 2 touchdowns in all 5 of those games. So, with the Jags being the 5th best team for opposing quarterbacks to face this season, this should be another productive week for Brissett fantasy wise. And the final one I'm picking as starting options is Bryce Young of Carolina. Whilst Young is unlikely to come close to the franchise record numbers he put up last week, he comes up against the 49ers, who rank near bottom of the league for passing yardage and passing touchdowns conceded. So he could well be worth another start in fantasy this week. Now then, looking at the maybe not options at quarterback, well, 2 of them have already played. I told you on Thursday that Josh Allen and Davis Mills weren't good options to start, and it proved so, particularly in Allen's case. But 3 more I would be hesitant about this week. Baker Mayfield of Tampa Bay, who unfortunately I own in one of my fantasy teams, so I may have to go with him, but I'm still nervous about it. Only 5 teams have conceded fewer passing touchdowns than the Rams this season, and have pretty much shut down opposing quarterbacks on the ground. Even if he gets Chris Godwin back for this game, this looks a tough assignment for Mayfield. Similarly, Daniel Jones of Indianapolis. The Chiefs have allowed just 9 passing touchdowns to their opposition this season and are pretty stingy yardage wise too. They're also amongst the 10 best in the league against opposing tight ends. So Tyler Warren, might not be the go-to option for Jones either. He's been a bit of a safety net for him. Excuse me. That could all mean the Colts may well have to lean on Jonathan Taylor again here, and Jones does not look a great fantasy option in this one. As I would also say about Trevor Lawrence of Jacksonville, Lawrence is averaging just 111. Well, he's not. I've forgotten the exact number. I've written it was a wrong number down here. But Lawrence isn't averaging great passing yards a game, and he's just 1.1 passing touchdowns a game. He also has 8 picks to his name this season. I can tell you that number's less than 200 yards a game, which shows the Jags are more winning in spite of him than because of him. Add to that, the Cardinals are the 7th toughest fantasy opponents for quarterbacks this season, and Lawrence should be riding the fantasy pine again this week. Right, let's move on to running backs. First of all, one I put up on Thursday and it worked out all right, James Cook. I said he was more likely to score a touchdown than Josh Allen. It proves to be the case. He only got 1 though, but did have 129 scrimmage yards. The other ones I like this week are Tre'Veyon Henderson of New England. Don't let the probable return of Ramondre Stevenson put you off starting Henderson this week. The Bengals have allowed more receiving touchdowns and the second most receiving yards to opposing running backs this season. So even if Henderson Stevenson, yes, get that right, does eat into Henderson's ground opportunities. He should still thrive as a receiving back, but I still expect him to get more carries than Stevenson anyhow. Another one I'd start is Jahmyr Gibbs of Detroit. Gibbs is averaging 106 scrimmage yards and a touchdown this season, and this matchup with the Giants looks to be a game where that may be the low end of what we see from Gibbs. A tandem that I like both of, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet in Seattle. Walker's the platoon leader of the two, but Charbonnet actually has more touchdowns than Walker this season. Against the worst team in the league in the Titans, both could well get into the end zone this week. And another duo I like is Travis Etienne and Basil Tootin of Jacksonville. With the Jags' severely depleted receiver core and Trevor Lawrence set to struggle in Week 12, the Jags' running game looks set to make up for them against the Cardinals, who ranked 9th best for opposing running backs to face in 2025. Both Etienne and Tootin could be worth fantasy starts this week. And in the maybe not column, Chase Brown of Cincinnati. Brown comes up against the number one run defense in the league of the Patriots this week. They have allowed just 3 touchdowns to opposing running backs all season. So this is not a week to start Brown, despite his 4 consecutive 100-yard scrimmage yard game streak that he is currently on. He has only scored a touchdown in 2 of his 10 games though this season. So I'm not one for starting Chase Brown this week. And the same applies to Sean Tucker of Tampa Bay. In the absence of Bucky Irving, Tucker was the guy on the ground for the Bucs last week, but the Rams, like the Pats, have allowed just 3 touchdowns to opposing running backs this season and are pretty stingy yardage-wise too. So Tucker is unlikely to follow up his strong week 11 fantasy showing against the Patriots. Another one I would consider benching this week is Aston Gionte of Las Vegas. Gionte has performed well behind a poor Raiders O-line this season, but has not had a 100 scrimmage yard gain for 5 games now, and the Browns have allowed the 4th least fantasy points to opposing running backs this season. So this could be 6 sub-100 yard games in a row for Gionte, and the Browns have allowed just 5 touchdowns to opposing running backs this season too. Another reason not to start him. Kareem Hunt of Kansas City is another one I'll be wary of. I've already explained that the Colts defend the run much better than the pass. Hunt has been a TD-dependent fantasy option this season, and I think Travis Kelce is a better red zone option than Hunt this week, thus making Hunt a potential fantasy bust. Tony Pollard of Tennessee. It's no surprise that on a bad team, Pollard is averaging just 64.9 scrimmage yards a game and has just 2 touchdowns to his name this season. Anybody still starting Pollard needs to get out of the habit, especially against the tough Seahawks D in Week 12. So let's move on to wide receivers. Ones I like, Amon-Ra St. Brown of Detroit. St. Brown had his least productive week of the season in Week 11, but against this Giants D looks set to bounce back big time here. I see him having 100-yard plus and at least 1 score in this game. And also, Jackson Smith-Njigba of Seattle. JSN has 700 scrimmage yard games from 10 appearances this season with a low of 90 yards. So he's been uber consistent. And against the worst team in the league, we could well see his 800-yard game and possibly a touchdown for good measure here. Another one I like, Ted McMillan, Carolina. McMillan is looking to find his NFL feet in recent weeks, and against the 49ers D that is kind to opposing wide receivers, could be set to continue his recent good form here. Another one, DK Metcalf of Pittsburgh. So maybe a bit of caveat on this is the Aaron Rodgers availability, which you might want to monitor. But even if he doesn't start, Mason Rudolph won't be too bad a replacement. And the Bears have given up 14 touchdowns to opposing wide receivers this season. And Metcalf have 5 of the 10 touchdowns scored by Steelers wide receivers this season. So he looks a good bet to get at least 1 here in what could be a high-scoring game. Now then, the final one, Cedric Tillman of Cleveland. 3 weeks ago, I put up Jerry Jeudy as a Browns wide receiver option, and now I'm back for more, this time with Tillman. Am I going crazy? Tillman led the Browns in receiving yards last week, and with David Njoku likely to miss this week, Tillman may be the best red zone option for Shazier Sanders to target against the Raiders team that has conceded 13 touchdowns to opposing wide receivers this season. So Tillman could be worth a punt if you're struggling. Ones I'll be wary of in the maybe not column, Michael Pittman of Indianapolis. Pittman is averaging just 58 yards a game this season, despite how good the Colts have been. And the Chiefs are tough on opposing wide receivers in terms of both yardage and touchdowns. So Pittman is a no-go for me this week. As is Juwan Jennings of San Francisco. Now, he's a touchdown-dependent fantasy wide receiver, more and more so these days. And with the Panthers allowing just 6 to opposing wide receivers this season, Jennings is too risky an option for me this week. Next one, Jordan Addison is one I would be wary of. In the 2 games between the Vikings and Packers last season, Addison had a combined total of 9 catches, although he did manage to turn 2 of those into touchdowns. In line with those numbers, he averages just 4 receptions a game this season, so he's rapidly becoming a boom or bust fantasy option more and more. So against the 7th worst opposition for wide receivers to face this season in the Packers, I see him being more bust than boom this week. Another one I'm wary of is CeeDee Lamb of Dallas. The Eagles have allowed just 2 touchdowns to opposing wide receivers in their last 5 games, and only 5 all season. With George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb competing for the crumbs from this particular Philadelphia table, it is worth noting Pickens has 7 touchdowns from 10 games and Lamb has 2 from 7. So Pickens looks the better option to score this week, making Lamb a risky play. And finally, one I would not consider a wide receiver this week is Jakobi Meyers of Las Vegas. Now, he may be a popular pick with Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter out for the Jags, but the Cardinals have only allowed 5 touchdowns to opposing wide receivers this season. Meyers himself has none in 9 games this season and averages just 51 receiving yards a game. So not for me, I'm afraid. Right, tight ends I like this week. Start with Trey McBride of Arizona. The Jags allow the 2nd most fantasy points to tight end this season, and McBride is one of, if not the best tight ends in the league right now. He's averaging 71.8 yards a game and has 7 scores this season, so he could well be the best tight end to start this week. Another one I like is Hunter Henry of New England. The Bengals have conceded over 80 yards a game to tight ends this season and over a touchdown a game to them too. Henry is the best place to take advantage of this matchup for New England in Week 12. Travis Kelce, now he used to be must start every week, but that's probably not the case anymore. But he is this week. The Colts give up more than 70 yards a game to tight ends. Kelce is still the guy in KC to make the most of this, and he may well get in the red zone here too. Brock Bowers of Las Vegas. If Vegas are likely to struggle on the ground against the Browns, as I think they might, then Bowers as their best receiving option could be their only option to score points in this game. So don't be put off playing him this week. And the same applies to George Kittle of San Francisco. Kittle has 151 yards and 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games, and it's this matchup against the Panthers could see him go close to 70 yards and a touchdown in this game too, which make him worth a fantasy start. The ones I'd be wary of include Tyler Warren of Indianapolis. Now, Warren is really good, but the Chiefs have allowed fewer than 50 yards a game to opposing tight ends and just a pair of touchdowns to them all season long. So be cautious with Warren. Same applies to Jake Ferguson, even more so for Dallas, as the Eagles are even tougher matchup than the Chiefs are. They allow fewer than 30 yards a game and just a single touchdown this season to opposing tight ends. Juwan Johnson of New Orleans is another one. He's been a decent starter in fantasy for the last 4 weeks, but that run could be set to end against a Falcons team that has allowed just 37.9 yards a game to tight ends and a solitary touchdown this campaign. Now, the other tight ends I said to be wary of, both played on Thursday night, were Dalton Schultz of Houston, who had 1 catch for 8 yards, and Dawson Knox of Buffalo, who had 3 catches for 17 yards. So those 2 were good picks as non-starters for me this week. Right, quickly on to defenses. These are the ones I'd start. Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens' defense and special teams should continue to thrive against the Jets in Week 12. Green Bay Packers. Well, Micah Parsons and Rashan Gary could be set for plenty of sacks against this Vikings O-line. The Cleveland Browns and Las Vegas Raiders play each other. Well, Myles Garrett will go ballistic against this terrible Raiders O-line, whilst Max Crosby and the Raiders secondary may like the look of Shadur Sanders at quarterback for the Browns for them to feast upon. So both of those teams could be worse fantasy starts this week. I'm starting the Raiders, for instance. The Seattle Seahawks D has been really good all season. The Titans offense is really bad. Enough said. Start the Seahawks DST. Kickers I like this week. Now these all fall into the category of the teams might be able to get into the red zone, but I'm not sure they'll be able to convert. So they might be kicking more field goals than extra points, which is what you want in a fantasy kicker. There's some from unfancied teams here, like Blake Krupe of New Orleans, Joey Sly of Tennessee, and Nick Folk of the Jets. The element of risking that the teams might get shut down or might be pressing for 2-point conversions as they're behind, but I'd still take a chance on those three. Brandon Aubrey of Dallas, well, he's the best kicker in the NFL. He just doesn't get many opportunities because Dallas score touchdowns rather than field goals. But against Philly, this might be one where he does get an opportunity to kick some field goals. So I like Aubrey this week. And the other one is Chad Ryland of Arizona. So that's my fantasy picks or not picks this week. I'll be back tomorrow with part 2 and part 3 of my weekly preview looking at the game. So part 2 will cover the 6 o'clock games, part 3 will cover the remainder. So see you for that tomorrow. Take care.